"You signed the order yourself, Your Grace." Lady Eleanor Ashcombe's voice carried across the crowded ballroom as two attendants placed a battered brass clock on the marble table. 6 months earlier, her husband, Adrian, Duke of Blackmere, had declared her dangerously insane after she claimed to witness the family solicitor's murder. She had been dragged from the estate in her nightdress while the household watched in silence. Now she had returned from the asylum thinner, scarred at the wrists, and holding the one object everyone insisted had been destroyed. The Duke stared at the clock. Its hands remained frozen at 11:17, the exact minute Eleanor had heard a scream inside the West Gallery. Yet the sworn testimony that condemned her stated the victim was alive until midnight. Eleanor turned the winding key. The mechanism clicked, shuddered, and released something hidden inside its casing. Someone near the ballroom doors whispered, "Stop her." Then every candle in the room went out. Women screamed. Glass shattered against the parquet floor. Somewhere beyond the darkness, a man overturned a chair and ran toward the clock. Eleanor did not move. She had anticipated darkness. During 182 nights at St. Orison's Asylum, she had learned that fear became useful once one stopped struggling against it. Beneath her left glove, a narrow cord was looped twice around her wrist. Its other end passed through the clock's brass handle. A hand seized the clock. Eleanor pulled. The cord snapped taut, and the thief cursed as the heavy mechanism struck the edge of the marble table. A small metal object fell from its open casing and skittered across the floor. "Guard the doors," Adrian's voice thundered through the ballroom. The command came too late. A door slammed in the musicians' gallery above them. Light returned gradually as servants entered carrying fresh tapers. Their flames revealed overturned chairs, frightened guests, and Eleanor standing beside the damaged clock. One of the attendants who had accompanied her from St. Orison's lay on the floor, clutching his bleeding temple. Adrian pushed through the gathering crowd. He wore the black evening coat and silver waistcoat she remembered, but grief had hardened his face during her absence. For a moment his gaze rested on the scars visible between her glove and sleeve. Something broke through his controlled expression. Horror, perhaps, or shame. Eleanor refused to comfort him by looking away. "What came out of the clock?" he demanded. She opened her empty hand. "You should ask the person who extinguished the candles." His eyes swept across the guests. Nearly 80 people had gathered for the announcement of a railway investment that promised to rescue Blackmere's failing northern farms. Among them were magistrates, landowners, bankers, and 3 of the physicians who had certified Eleanor's madness. Every one of them had witnessed her return. That was why she had chosen tonight. Adrian lowered his voice. "You should not have been released without notice." "I was not released." His face changed. The words passed through the nearest guests in startled murmurs. Eleanor saw Lord Percival Ashcombe, Adrian's cousin and acting estate trustee, retreat half a step. He was an elegant man of 40, with pale gloves and the patient smile of someone accustomed to being believed. Percival recovered first. "Then she is an escaped lunatic. Adrian, she must be restrained before she harms someone." The attendants beside Eleanor moved protectively in front of her. They were not asylum warders, as the guests had assumed. Thomas Reed was a retired constable, while Mrs. Wren had once served as Eleanor's mother's companion. "I invited them," Eleanor said. "They have no authority to confine me." Percival looked toward the physicians. "Dr. Mowbray?" A silver-haired man stepped forward. Eleanor remembered his fingers forcing her jaw open while another physician poured bitter medicine down her throat. Tonight he adopted the sympathetic expression he used before witnesses. "Lady Eleanor is highly intelligent," Mowbray said. "Her illness frequently presents as elaborate reasoning. Contradicting her may provoke violence." A few guests recoiled. 6 months earlier, those words would have filled Eleanor with desperate anger. Now she recognized their purpose. If she raised her voice, she was dangerous. If she spoke calmly, she was cunning. If she remained silent, she was withdrawn. Every path led back to the locked ward. She bent and examined the clock's casing instead. The hidden object was gone, yet a curved steel clasp remained inside the wooden frame, where no part of the chiming mechanism required one. A smear of fresh black wax clung to its edge. Someone had reached the clock before the ballroom went dark. Eleanor, Adrian's voice was quieter now. Tell me how you obtained this. From the evidence room fire. That room burned 5 months ago. The room burned. This did not. The official report named the clock among the destroyed objects. Then the report lied. Adrian glanced at the clock. Doubt entered his expression, but it was not yet trust. Eleanor felt the old wound of that distinction. He had once promised to believe her before the entire world. When belief became costly, he had chosen 3 physicians, a frightened servant, and the testimony of his own cousin. Mr. Harcourt died at 12:20, Adrian said. The surgeon established the time. The surgeon estimated it. 3 witnesses saw him alive after 11:17. No, 3 witnesses claimed they heard his voice through a closed library door. Percival's smile vanished for the briefest instant. Eleanor noticed. She also noticed that his right glove was missing. A servant knelt near the musician's platform gathering fragments of a wineglass. Beneath the velvet curtain behind him, something pale protruded from the shadows. Eleanor crossed the room. Mowbray caught her arm. Your Grace, observe her agitation. She looked down at his hand until he released her. Touch me again, doctor, and 80 witnesses will observe something far more useful. The servant lifted the curtain. A single pale glove lay on the floor. Percival raised both hands. His right hand was bare, but there was no alarm in his face. I lost it while helping Lady Faversham during the confusion. Lady Faversham, still trembling beside the orchestra, nodded uncertainly. I believe he did. Eleanor did not pick up the glove. Evidence lost its power when handled by the person everyone already called delusional. Mr. Reed, she said. The retired constable lifted it with a clean handkerchief. Along the glove's forefinger ran a line of black wax identical to the smear inside the clock. The ballroom fell silent. Percival gave a soft laugh. Sealing wax in a duke's house. Hardly evidence of murder. No, Eleanor agreed. It is evidence that someone touched the hidden clasp before the candles went out. Adrian stared at his cousin. Did you? Of course not. Then permit Reed to examine your hand. Percival's eyes hardened, but he extended it. No cut, stain, or obvious mark appeared upon the skin. For one painful moment, Eleanor feared the clue would collapse before it had begun. Then Mrs. Wren pointed toward Percival's cuff. What is that? A short red thread clung to the gold button. Eleanor looked at the wounded attendant on the floor. His coat was brown. The ballroom curtains were blue. The lining inside the clock, however, was faded crimson velvet, and one section had been freshly torn. Percival pulled down his sleeve. At that instant, the clock struck once. Everyone turned. Its hands had not moved from 11:17. A second strike followed, duller than the first. Then a third sounded from somewhere inside the wall behind the marble table. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. She had heard that same uneven sequence on the night of Harcourt's murder, moments before someone seized her from behind and pressed a bitter-smelling cloth across her mouth. The chime had never come from the clock. She approached the wall and pressed her fingers against its carved wooden paneling. Cold air touched her skin through a narrow gap. The west gallery door had not been bricked shut, as the servants testified. It had been concealed. Adrian came beside her. What is behind this wall? Before she could answer, a muffled cry rose from the hidden passage. It was followed by a man's desperate voice. Lady Eleanor, do not open it. He is still inside. Adrian reached for the concealed panel, but Eleanor caught his wrist before his fingers touched the carved wood. If the man behind this wall wanted to be found, he would not have waited until the ballroom was full. The Duke looked down at her hand. 6 months earlier, she would have released him at once, fearful that even the smallest disagreement might confirm his belief that her mind was failing. This time, she held on until he stepped back. Reed, Eleanor said, take 2 servants and guard every visible exit from the west gallery. No one enters alone. You presume to command my household? Adrian asked. Someone inside your household murdered Mr. Harcourt, confined an injured man behind this wall, and tried to steal evidence in front of 80 witnesses. If you still consider wounded pride the greater danger, sign another order and send me back." Shame crossed his face, but he did not defend himself. Instead, he ordered the musicians' platform cleared and sent the guests into the adjoining drawing room under the magistrate's supervision. Dr. Mowbray protested that Eleanor required immediate restraint. Adrian turned on him with such cold fury that the physician fell silent. "My wife will not be touched without her consent," the Duke said. Eleanor heard the words without mistaking them for repair. Protection offered after betrayal could not erase the locked doors, the forced medicine, or the nights she had screamed, until her voice disappeared. Adrian removed a decorative brass pin from the panel, but nothing moved. Eleanor knelt beside the clock and placed 2 fingers against its wooden case. Her father had collected mechanical instruments, and after his death, 12-year-old Eleanor had spent years in the workshop of Mr. Abel Finch, the nearly deaf clockmaker who maintained them. He had taught her that every machine confessed through vibration. A damaged spring trembled differently from a false one, and a bell carried the shape of the space surrounding it. The 3 uneven strikes had not come through the ballroom air. They had traveled along the wall. She pressed her ear to the panel and tapped its surface from left to right. Solid oak answered near the floor, then a hollow chamber, followed by a narrow strip of stone. "The opening is not here," she said. "The mechanism is above us." Her gaze rose toward the clock. A fine wire extended from the steel clasp inside its casing and disappeared through a drilled hole in the marble table. Someone had placed the clock in that precise position before the ball. When Eleanor turned the winding key, she had not merely released the hidden object, she had pulled the wire connected to the passage bell. "Who arranged this table?" she asked. The butler, Mr. Hale, stepped forward, visibly unsettled. "Lord Percival supervised the ballroom himself, my lady. He said the investors required a display of the estate's oldest pieces." Percival, standing beside the magistrate, smiled without warmth. The clock belonged to Adrian's grandfather. "There is nothing suspicious in displaying a family heirloom. You told everyone it had burned. I relied upon the evidence report. A report bearing your seal. The estate seal," Percival corrected. "Used by several officials while Adrian attended Parliament." Eleanor examined the marble beneath the clock. The wire passed through an old aperture once used to secure a bronze statue. Whoever had prepared the mechanism understood both the house and its forgotten fittings. She turned the key backward until the wire slackened. Something clicked above the musician's gallery, and the concealed panel opened less than an inch. A man's fingers appeared in the gap. They were bloodied and trembling. "Do not let him see me," the voice pleaded. Adrian moved toward the opening. "Who are you?" The fingers disappeared. "He said the Duchess was dead. He said if I spoke, he would send my daughters where he sent her." Eleanor recognized the voice then. Samuel Pike had served as assistant clerk under Mr. Harcourt and vanished 2 days after the murder. Percival had reported that Pike had stolen £50 from the estate and fled to France. "Samuel," she said gently, "this is Lady Eleanor. Mr. Reed is here, and the county magistrate is 20 feet away. Tell us how to open the panel." A choking sound came from the passage. "The lever is inside the clock, but he changed it. He knew you would return for it." Eleanor studied the steel clasp, the crimson lining, and the black wax. In Mr. Finch's workshop, she had learned never to force a mechanism altered by an unknown hand. Pressure applied in the wrong direction could drop a weight, release a blade, or ignite a powder charge. She asked Reed to hold a taper near the casing without touching it. A faint, greasy shine appeared along the inner seam. "Lamp oil," she said. Several guests retreated. A wire ran from the hidden clasp toward a small glass capsule buried beneath the crimson velvet. If the clasp were pulled fully, the capsule would break over a prepared match head. The clock, the documents hidden inside it, and anyone standing close enough would burn. "Someone expected me to open this before witnesses," Eleanor said. "They wanted my evidence destroyed by my own hand." Dr. Mowbray seized upon the statement. "Or perhaps there is no injured clerk. The voice may be part of her delusion. Then you will have no objection to standing beside the clock while I pull the clasp," Eleanor replied. Mowbray went pale. Mrs. Wren covered a brief smile. Eleanor asked for a hairpin and used its rounded end to lift the velvet without disturbing the capsule. Underneath lay two narrow channels. One controlled the panel, the other held the incendiary device. The red thread found on Percival's cuff matched the velvet, but proved only that he had touched the casing. It did not establish when, why, or whether another person had done the same. Eleanor needed something stronger. She eased the wire from the dangerous channel and guided it into the brass wheel controlling the wall. The panel opened with a low groan. Samuel Pike collapsed into Reed's arms. He was gaunt, his beard overgrown, and an iron shackle hung from one ankle. More alarming was the fresh cut across his palm, the wound that had left blood inside the clock when he pushed a message through the connected service shaft. Adrian stared at him. "You have been inside my walls for 6 months?" "Not always here," Pike whispered. "They moved me from the old ice house this afternoon, because the investors were coming. I heard them say the Duchess had found the clock." Eleanor crouched beside him. "Who moved you?" Terror closed his face. His eyes traveled across the ballroom and fixed on someone behind her. Before he could speak, Dr. Mowbray stepped forward with a silver medicine case. "The man is delirious. He needs a sedative." Samuel recoiled so violently that his shackle struck the floor. "Not the drops, please, not the drops." Eleanor caught Mowbray's wrist as he uncorked a blue glass bottle. The bitter smell rising from it was the same odor that had filled her throat before every missing hour at St. Orison's. "What is in this?" she demanded. "A harmless sleeping tincture." "Then drink it." Mowbray tore his hand free, spilling several drops across the marble. Where the liquid touched the black sealing wax on the clock, the wax softened immediately and exposed a stamped impression beneath it. Eleanor wiped away the dissolving layer with Reed's handkerchief. The original seal was not Blackmere's crest. It belonged to St. Orison's Asylum. Samuel stared at the mark and began to weep. "That was on the crates," he said. "The crates Mr. Harcourt discovered in the estate accounts." Adrian's expression sharpened. "What crates?" "Medicine sent from Blackmere under false names." Harcourt said the payments were hidden among the railway expenses. Across the ballroom, a servant suddenly shouted. Lord Percival was no longer standing beside the magistrate. The doors remained guarded, yet a second concealed panel behind the musician's curtain now stood open. Adrian ordered Reed after him, but Samuel seized Eleanor's sleeve. "Let him go," the clerk whispered. "Percival did not kill Mr. Harcourt." Eleanor felt every person in the room draw breath. Samuel looked toward Dr. Mowbray, then past him, to the 3 physicians who had signed her confinement papers. "The man who killed Harcourt is still here," he said, "and before midnight, he intends to make the Duke sign away every acre of Blackmere." Adrian ordered the ballroom doors locked before anyone could leave, but Eleanor knew confinement alone would not expose the murderer. Nearly 80 guests had moved between the ballroom and drawing room during the darkness, and the concealed passages connected 3 wings of Blackmere Hall. Percival might already be beyond the estate grounds, while the man Samuel feared remained close enough to hear every word. "No one signs anything before midnight," Eleanor said. Sir Julian Voss, chairman of the Blackmere Railway Company, stepped out from among the investors. He was a tall, silver-templed gentleman whose calm authority had won Adrian's confidence during the estate's financial crisis. "Your Grace, the parliamentary deadline cannot be altered because your wife has disrupted a private gathering. If the agreement is not executed tonight, the northern farms lose the railway connection, and Blackmere forfeits the deposit." "How much?" Eleanor asked. Voss looked at Adrian rather than her. £80,000. A murmur passed through the room. The sum was large enough to cripple even a dukedom. Adrian's father had left the estate burdened with mortgages, failed mines, and tenants whose rents had not been raised in 20 years. Adrian had spent a decade repairing the damage, yet 2 floods and a poor harvest had consumed his reserves. The railway appeared to be his last chance to preserve both the land and the families depending upon it. That desperation had made him trust Voss. It had also made him vulnerable. "Bring me the agreement," Eleanor said. Voss gave a thin smile. "You have no legal authority over Blackmere's finances." "She is the Duchess of Blackmere," Adrian replied. It was the first time that evening he had spoken her title as something more than an obligation. Voss's expression remained composed, but his thumb pressed hard against the gold head of his cane. A clerk brought the railway documents from the library. Eleanor did not begin with the contract. She examined the ribbon, seals, page edges, and stitching. Her knowledge of mechanical construction had taught her to study how separate parts joined, while years managing her father's neglected accounts had taught her that fraud often hid not in the numbers themselves, but in the order in which they appeared. The final signature page was attached with newer thread than the preceding sheets. "This page has been replaced," she said. Voss's solicitor objected immediately. An absurd claim. Eleanor placed the agreement beside an invitation from the ballroom table. Both documents carried Blackmere's crest, but the contract seal was compressed more deeply on its right side. The estate seal has a chipped lower edge. Mr. Harcourt noted it in last year's inventory. This impression has no chip. Adrian examined it. A duplicate? Or a forgery prepared before the original seal was damaged? Voss sighed as though enduring a child's interruption. Even if a clerk restrung the pages, the terms remain unchanged. Eleanor read the substituted page aloud. If the railway company failed to complete the Northern Line within 18 months, Blackmere would not recover its deposit. Instead, 12,000 acres bordering the proposed track would pass to the company as compensation for preliminary works. The land included 7 villages, the old iron mine, and St. Orison's Asylum. The company may abandon construction the morning after Adrian signs, Eleanor said. Blackmere would lose land worth 3 times the deposit. Voss's patience finally cracked. Your wife was confined for delusions involving documents, voices, and conspiracies. Are we now expected to risk hundreds of laborers' livelihoods because she dislikes a clause approved by council? Several investors nodded. The cruelty of his argument was its efficiency. Eleanor's discovery did not need to be disproved if she herself could be discredited. Adrian remained silent long enough for old pain to tighten around her ribs. Then he took the pen waiting beside the agreement and snapped it in half. The signing is suspended. Voss stared at him. You will lose £80,000. Then I shall lose it after reading every page myself. The room fell quiet. Adrian's decision was costly, but Eleanor would not confuse it with trust until he proved he could withstand more than one moment of pressure. Samuel was carried to a sofa, where Mrs. Wren cleaned the cut in his palm with water and brandy. Dr. Mowbray continued insisting that only he possessed the skill to treat prolonged confinement. Eleanor refused to allow him near the clerk. You cannot diagnose every inconvenient witness as mad, she said. I diagnosed you after observing symptoms witnessed by your husband. Symptoms produced by your medicine. Mowbray's jaw tightened. You cannot prove that. Not yet. While the magistrate questioned the guests, Eleanor returned to the brass clock. The hidden clasp had held something small enough to fit between the velvet lining and the rear plate. In the darkness, the thief had removed it, but the casing retained an impression. She asked Mrs. Wren for a sheet of paper and gently pressed it over the indentation with the rounded end of the hairpin. A narrow rectangle appeared, crossed by 5 raised ridges. It was not the shape of a letter. It resembled a counting house tally key, the type used to align coded entries across separate ledgers. Samuel saw the rubbing and struggled upright. Harcourt had one like that. He called it the comb. What did it open? Nothing. It was laid over rows of figures. The teeth showed which amounts belonged together. Eleanor understood. A fraudulent account could survive inspection if every false payment appeared under an innocent heading. A slotted key placed over the ledger would reveal the true pattern. Harcourt had hidden the key inside the clock because he expected his account books to be seized. Where are the ledgers? She asked. Percival took the estate copies after the murder. The asylum kept another set in its dispensary. And the railway company? Mr. Harcourt believed all 3 accounts were one scheme. Sir Julian Voss spoke from behind her. A dead solicitor's suspicion, repeated by a confessed thief, interpreted by an escaped patient. You have built an impressive tower from rotten wood. Eleanor turned. Then you will not object when we compare the accounts. The railway ledgers are in London. The train cannot bring them before tomorrow. Precisely. His confidence revealed more than refusal would have done. He wanted the contract signed tonight because daylight permitted verification. Eleanor looked at the clock's stopped hands. 11:17 had not merely marked the moment of Harcourt's attack. It might have recorded the last instant before the account key was concealed. She removed the rear plate and examined the gear teeth. 1 brass wheel had been filed in a deliberate sequence, 5 teeth shortened, 3 untouched, then 2 shortened. The pattern matched the ridges impressed in the velvet. Even without the stolen key, Harcourt had copied its arrangement into the clock mechanism. Eleanor drew the sequence for the magistrate and asked Mr. Hale to bring every estate ledger connected with railway expenses, medicine, and northern farm repairs. "There are more than 20 volumes," the butler said. "Then bring 20. For the next hour, Eleanor laid the ledgers across the ballroom floor in chronological order. Adrian worked opposite her, passing each volume without argument. He noticed that she flexed her scarred wrists whenever the weight became painful, and quietly began lifting the heavier books himself. Neither spoke of the gesture. The filed wheel pattern identified 5 columns, then 3, then 2. When Eleanor aligned the figures, regular payments emerged. Money left Blackmere as railway surveying fees, entered St. Orison's as charitable donations, and returned to an unnamed supplier through purchases of sedatives. The amounts totaled £43,000. "Someone has been using the estate to finance the asylum," Adrian said. "Not the asylum," Eleanor replied. "Whatever is being shipped through it." Samuel pointed weakly at a repeated invoice mark, a small circle divided by a vertical line. That was stamped on the crates. Sir Julian's solicitor gathered the railway documents into his case. "This spectacle has no legal significance. My client is leaving." The magistrate blocked the door. "No one leaves until these accounts are secured." A sudden convulsion shook Samuel's body. His back arched, his breath stopped, and dark foam appeared at the corner of his mouth. Mrs. Wren cried out. Eleanor rushed to him, but Dr. Mowbray pushed her aside and opened his medicine case. "Poison," he announced, after barely touching Samuel's pulse. "Administered within the last quarter hour." His gaze fell upon the glass of brandy beside the sofa. The magistrate smelled it, then searched the small reticule Eleanor had carried from the asylum. Inside lay a paper packet she had never seen before. Mowbray opened it carefully. White powder dusted the black velvet. "The same compound used at St. Orison's," he said. "Lady Eleanor stole it during her escape." Adrian looked from the poison to his wife. Around them, the fragile trust of the ballroom shattered into frightened whispers. Samuel's hand clawed at Eleanor's sleeve. With his remaining strength, he pressed something into her palm, the railway chairman's missing gold cufflink, and whispered 3 words only she could hear. Voss was there. Then Samuel Pike stopped breathing. "He is not dead," Eleanor said. Dr. Mowbray had already covered Samuel's face with a linen cloth, but she tore it away. The clerk's lips were dark, his chest motionless, and no pulse could be felt at his wrist. Yet Eleanor had seen the same rigid stillness inside St. Orison's. Patients who resisted the nightly medicine sometimes collapsed, appeared dead for several minutes, and awakened unable to remember what had happened. One woman named Agnes Bell had been carried toward the burial room before Mrs. Wren discovered warmth beneath her jaw. Eleanor placed 2 fingers there now. "There is a pulse, very slow but present." Mowbray caught her shoulder. "Your interference will kill him. Your treatment already nearly has." She ordered Mrs. Wren to keep Samuel's airway clear, while Reed fetched the magistrate's surgeon from the drawing room. The surgeon examined Samuel and confirmed a faint heartbeat. Mowbray's expression did not change, but he quietly closed his medicine case. Eleanor saw him slide the blue bottle into a compartment beneath its leather lining. "Search the case," she told the magistrate. Mowbray stepped backward. "I am a physician. You have no right. You searched my reticule without hesitation." The magistrate held out his hand. Mowbray refused, and 2 constables took the case from him. The hidden compartment contained 6 blue bottles, 3 packets of white powder, and a bundle of blank commitment forms, already bearing the signatures of the same physicians who had certified Eleanor. One form had been partially completed. The patient's name read Samuel Pike. Another bore no name at all, but beneath the space reserved for the guardian's authorization appeared Adrian's forged signature. "These could be ordinary medical supplies," Sir Julian Voss said, "and the forms may have been prepared for legitimate emergencies." "Before the patients were examined?" Eleanor asked. "Convenience is not proof of conspiracy." "No, but murder is." She opened her palm and showed the cufflink Samuel had given her. It bore Voss's initials in tiny diamonds. His left cuff was fastened with its matching piece. For the first time, his confidence weakened. "It was stolen from my dressing room." Samuel said you were present when Harcourt died. A dying man may say anything. He was not dying until someone poisoned his brandy. Voss turned toward the magistrate. This woman escaped lawful confinement, entered the house without permission, disrupted a contractual meeting, threatened a physician, and was found carrying poison. If her husband refuses to control her, you must. The magistrate hesitated. Every discovery pointed toward a scheme, yet every piece could still be explained separately. Eleanor possessed the poison. She had opportunity to reach Samuel's glass. Her history of confinement made the accusation easier to accept than the notion that respected physicians, a railway chairman, and estate officials had cooperated in murder. Lady Eleanor, the magistrate said reluctantly, until the powder has been examined, I must ask you to remain under supervision. Adrian moved between them. She will remain under mine. Your Grace, your personal interest, is precisely why I failed her before. I accepted conclusions that spared me the humiliation of questioning men I respected. I will not repeat that cowardice because the same men now find it convenient. Eleanor looked at him sharply. It was not an apology, but it was the first honest name he had given his betrayal. Cowardice, not grief, confusion, medical authority, or concern for her health. He removed the Blackmere signet from his finger and placed it on the contract table. If my rank prevents a lawful investigation, I surrender my authority as county lieutenant until this matter is resolved. But no one takes my wife anywhere tonight. The sacrifice silenced even Voss. Adrian's county office carried influence at Parliament and command over the local militia. He had risked both before knowing whether Eleanor's evidence would clear her. Reed returned with alarming news. A stable boy had seen Percival riding north less than 20 minutes earlier. The road led not toward the railway station, but St. Orison's Asylum. He is going for the dispensary ledgers, Eleanor said. Sir Julian Voss checked the ballroom clock. In this storm? Absurd. Only then did Eleanor hear rain striking the high windows. During the confrontation, wind had risen over the moors. The road to St. Orison's crossed a narrow stone bridge and required nearly 40 minutes by carriage in fair weather. Percival, riding alone, could reach it in half that time. If the ledgers prove the payments, they will not survive until morning, she said. Adrian ordered horses prepared. The magistrate insisted that Eleanor remain at Blackmere, but she refused. I know the asylum's rooms, locks, and staff. You do not. You escaped from that building hours ago. Which means I also know how to enter without the governor's permission. Mrs. Wren stayed with Samuel while the surgeon attempted to revive him. Reed, Adrian, Eleanor, and 2 constables rode north through the rain. Eleanor's wrists burned each time her mare struck the flooded ground, but she did not slow. Adrian remained beside her without trying to lead. Lightning exposed the outline of St. Orison's upon the hill, a long gray building with narrow windows and a chapel tower rising above its central ward. Then an orange glow appeared behind the dispensary roof. Fire, Reed shouted. The front gates were chained from inside. Patients crowded at barred windows while smoke poured through the upper floor. No alarm bell sounded. Eleanor dismounted and ran toward the eastern wall. During her confinement, she had discovered that St. Orison's operated by a central system of clockwork bells. Each ward bell connected to the chapel mechanism so attendants could identify the location of disturbances by a different sequence of strikes. On the night she escaped, Mrs. Wren had jammed the women's ward bell at 11:17, creating a continuous signal that drew the warders upstairs. That was how Eleanor knew the brass clock's frozen time had not been chosen accidentally. Harcourt had set it to the same hour, because someone at St. Orison's had used the asylum bell system to create his false midnight alibi. The service entrance is beyond the chapel garden, she said. They found the door bolted but not locked. Inside, smoke filled the corridor. An attendant lay unconscious beside a ring of keys. Eleanor recognized him as Mr. Clegg, one of the few warders who had secretly given patients extra blankets. She dragged him toward the entrance, while Reed took the keys. The dispensary is west, Adrian said. The women's ward is above it, Eleanor replied. 23 patients are locked in their rooms. The ledgers may be destroyed. Then they are destroyed. She seized the keys from Reed. I will not preserve proof by letting innocent women burn. Adrian looked toward the flames consuming the far corridor, then followed her upstairs without argument. Behind the first barred door, women screamed and struck the wood with their fists. Eleanor identified each key by the wear along its teeth. The ward key had been used so frequently that its central notch was polished smooth. She unlocked the cells while Adrian and the constables guided the patients toward the stairs. Smoke thickened. Ceiling plaster crashed behind them. At the final room, Eleanor found Agnes Bell unconscious beneath her bed. Flames had reached the corridor, blocking the direct path to the staircase. Adrian wrapped Agnes in a blanket and lifted her, but a burning beam fell between them and the others. The laundry shaft, Eleanor coughed. She led him through the bathing room to a narrow service passage used for linen carts. They descended in darkness, Adrian carrying Agnes while Eleanor felt along the wall for each turn. At the bottom they emerged behind the dispensary. Its door stood open. The shelves had been emptied, and burning papers covered the floor. A man was feeding ledgers into the furnace. Percival turned at the sound of their entrance. Blood ran from a cut above his eye, and terror distorted his usually controlled face. "You should have stayed at Blackmere," he told Eleanor. Adrian set Agnes safely near the outer door and advanced on his cousin. "Step away from the fire. You still do not understand." Percival held up the missing tally key from Harcourt's clock. "I did not come to destroy the evidence. I came to retrieve the only thing that can expose them." A gunshot exploded from the service passage. Percival jerked backward and fell beside the furnace. Behind him, a shadow disappeared into the smoke. Eleanor dropped to her knees and pressed her hand against his bleeding shoulder. The bullet had passed through without striking his chest. "Who shot you?" she demanded. Percival clutched her sleeve and pushed the tally key into her hand. "The clock did not lie about the murder," he gasped. "It lied about who was standing beside you." Then the chapel bell began striking midnight, even though Eleanor's pocket watch showed only 11:23 free 24. The false midnight bell continued to thunder through St. Orison's while the fire climbed toward the chapel rafters. Eleanor counted each strike. The first 11 were evenly spaced, but the 12th came 4 seconds late. That same delay had existed in the 3 chimes transmitted through Blackmere's wall. The sequence was not being produced by the chapel clock. Someone was pulling the ward alarm by hand and imitating midnight. "The shooter is still inside the building," she said. Adrian drew the pistol Reed had given him and moved toward the smoke-filled service passage, but Eleanor stopped him. "That is what he wants. The bell is drawing us away from the patients." A crash sounded above them, followed by renewed screaming. Adrian looked from the passage to the burning staircase. 6 months earlier, he might have pursued the man who threatened his authority. Now he lifted Percival from the floor and helped Eleanor carry him toward the garden. They returned twice for patients who had collapsed in the corridor. By the time the chapel roof gave way, all 23 women, 4 attendants, Agnes Bell, and Percival, had been moved beyond the eastern wall. 2 constables searched the grounds, but the shooter escaped through a drainage tunnel beneath the mortuary. Rain weakened the fire before it reached the administrative wing, though the dispensary and its ledgers were destroyed. Percival regained consciousness beneath a canvas shelter. The bullet had passed through his shoulder, and Reed bound the wound tightly. "You knew Eleanor was not mad," Adrian said. Percival closed his eyes. "I knew the evidence against her had been arranged." Adrian struck him. Percival fell against the wet grass, blood spreading through his bandage. Eleanor stepped between the cousins before Adrian could hit him again. "I need his answers more than you need your anger." Adrian's fists remained clenched, but he obeyed her. Percival confessed that Harcourt had discovered false payments 6 weeks before his death. The solicitor suspected railway funds were being redirected through St. Orison's, but the money was only one part of the scheme. Surveyors employed by Voss had found a rich coal seam beneath Blackmere's northern villages. If Adrian signed the substituted contract, the railway company could deliberately abandon construction, seize the land, and sell the mineral rights for nearly £500,000. "Why help them?" Eleanor asked. "I owed Voss £30,000, Percival replied. "He promised to erase the debt if I gave him access to the estate seal and Harcourt's accounts. I thought they meant to deceive Adrian in business. By the time I understood they intended murder, I was already guilty enough to hang beside them." Harcourt had made the tally key after finding coded payments linking Voss, Mowbray, and several Asylum suppliers. Percival stole it from the clock after Harcourt's death, then returned it when Voss threatened his younger sister. You placed it back inside the clock before tonight's ball, Eleanor said. I hoped you would find it publicly. You always understood mechanisms better than Adrian's clerks. Then why try to take it when the candles went out? I heard Voss whisper that the clock was trapped. I was trying to remove the key before you pulled the clasp far enough to ignite it. The black wax and crimson thread on his glove supported the explanation. His cowardice had helped create the danger, but he had not attempted to destroy the evidence. Who killed Harcourt? Adrian demanded. Percival looked toward the smoking asylum. I never saw the blow. Voss ordered me to bring the duplicate seal to the West Gallery at 11:30. When I arrived, Harcourt was already on the floor. Eleanor was unconscious beside him, and Mowbray was holding the blue bottle. Voss told me Harcourt had attacked her. And you believed him? No. I chose to behave as if I did. Eleanor understood the distinction too well. Evil often survived not because every accomplice believed the lie, but because the truth demanded a price they refused to pay. Percival revealed that Voss and Mowbray had altered the clocks at both Blackmere and St. Orisons. Harcourt was attacked at 11:17, but witnesses were made to believe it happened after midnight. Voss had attended a public dinner at the King's Arms until 11:30, while Mowbray claimed to be treating patients at St. Orisons when its chapel bell struck 12. If the murder occurred at midnight, both possessed alibis. If it occurred at 11:17, Voss could not have reached Blackmere in time, but Mowbray could. The road from St. Orisons takes 40 minutes, Adrian said. Not through the mine tunnel, Eleanor replied. During her escape, Mrs. Wren had shown her an abandoned cart passage linking the asylum grounds to the west edge of Blackmere. A horse could cross it in 10 minutes, Percival nodded. Harcourt found maintenance payments for that tunnel hidden among the railway surveys. Adrian looked toward Eleanor. Then Mowbray killed him. Perhaps, but we still cannot prove who used the tunnel, who struck Harcourt, or who altered the bells. Percival's confession will be attacked as the invention of a debtor saving himself. They searched the surviving administrative rooms for patient files. Most records concerning Eleanor had been removed, but Agnes Bell led her to the laundry, where an attendant named Miss Clara Webb had hidden copied medicine schedules inside rolls of clean linen. Clara had watched Mowbray increase Eleanor's dose whenever she asked about Harcourt's death. She had also copied an instruction ordering attendants to report Eleanor screaming at midnight, although on 3 of those nights, the Duchess had been unconscious before 10. Why did you keep these? Eleanor asked. Clara lowered her eyes. My sister was committed here 2 years ago after refusing to sell her farm to one of Voss's companies. She died within a month. I began copying everything after that. The schedules established systematic drugging, but the most disturbing page concerned Adrian's mother. The late Duchess Helena had been confined at St. Orisons 22 years earlier under Mowbray's father, with the younger doctor assisting. Her symptoms, doses, and midnight terrors matched Eleanor's exactly. Adrian sat on a broken stone bench outside the laundry and read the page until rain blurred the ink. I was 12, he said. She told me the medicine stole hours from her memory. I was ashamed of her. The last time she begged me not to leave, I pulled my hand away because Mowbray said affection encouraged the delusion. His voice remained controlled, which made the grief inside it more painful. She died 3 days later. When you began speaking of missing time and voices inside the walls, I thought I was watching the same illness take you. I told myself confinement was mercy. Eleanor sat beside him but did not take his hand. You were a child when they deceived you about your mother. You were a man when you refused to believe your wife. I know. Do you? Because saving me tonight does not change the night you let strangers drag me away. Nothing can change it. He removed the key to Blackmere Hall from his coat and placed it in her palm. When this is finished, the house, the estate income settled upon you, and every decision about our marriage will be yours. If you leave, I will defend that choice publicly. If you stay only long enough to expose them, I will ask for nothing more. For the first time, he offered her something greater than protection, the freedom to reject him. Eleanor closed her fingers around the key. First, we survived the morning. A constable arrived from Blackmere with terrible news. Samuel Pike had awakened, but before he could give a formal statement, Sir Julian Voss produced a warrant from London, accusing Percival, Samuel, and Eleanor of conspiring to defraud the railway company. Dr. Mowbray had disappeared. The magistrate, under pressure from Voss's investors, had seized every ledger from the ballroom. Worse, Voss had invoked a clause Adrian had overlooked. Suspending the contract before midnight triggered immediate repayment of the £80,000 deposit. Blackmere's bank held insufficient funds. At 9 o'clock the next morning, officers of the railway company would take temporary possession of the northern lands until the debt was settled. "He no longer needs Adrian's signature," Percival whispered. "He needed only to make us stop the signing." Eleanor looked at the surviving tally key and finally understood why Voss had allowed her to expose the substituted page so easily. The fraudulent contract had been bait. By preventing Adrian from signing, she had activated the older loan agreement and handed Voss the land through lawful seizure. The fire had destroyed the asylum ledgers. The magistrate held the estate accounts, and the only witness connecting Mowbray to the murder was a compromised accomplice. Voss had turned every correct decision she made into another step toward his victory. Then, Agnes Bell approached, carrying the blackened brass face of the chapel clock. "I found this beneath the tower," she said. Scratched into its back were 5 words in Harcourt's handwriting. "The 12th bell has no hammer." Eleanor stared at the sentence until the final piece of the false alibi began to take shape. The clock had not merely recorded the lie. Harcourt had altered it so the murderer would be forced to reveal knowledge no innocent man could possess. Eleanor did not explain Harcourt's message immediately. She carried the blackened clock face into the ruined chapel and examined the fallen mechanism beneath the tower. The fire had warped its iron frame, but the striking wheel remained intact. 11 deep notches surrounded its edge. Where the 12th should have been, the metal had been deliberately filed smooth. At midnight, the mechanism could release the hammer only 11 times. The final sound heard across St. Orisons on the night of Harcourt's murder could not have come from the chapel clock. Someone had produced it by pulling the ward alarm 4 seconds later, the same delay Eleanor had counted during the fire. Harcourt must have discovered the alteration and scratched his warning onto the clock face before confronting the conspirators. "How does that expose the murderer?" Adrian asked. "The witnesses at Blackmere claimed Harcourt spoke after they heard 12 strokes," Eleanor replied. But the brass clock in the West Gallery was connected to St. Orison's bell line through the old mine tunnel. The first 11 sounds traveled from the chapel mechanism. The 12th was added manually to complete the false midnight. Whoever pulled the alarm was at St. Orisons, not Blackmere. Then Mowbray has an alibi for the murder, not proof against him. Only if Harcourt died at midnight. Eleanor opened the brass clock and showed Adrian the stopped balance wheel. A dark line marked one tooth where the mechanism had been struck violently. This wheel stopped at 11:17 when the clock fell during the attack. The first medical report recorded Harcourt's blood beneath the broken base, but that line was removed from the final copy. The clock establishes the true time of the struggle. Mowbray could pull the false midnight alarm at St. Orisons and reach Blackmere through the mine tunnel after 11, but he could not be in both places at 11:17. Adrian understood. Someone else pulled the 12th alarm for him. Yes, and only the conspirators knew it was necessary. Percival remembered that Mowbray's chief attendant, Mr. Clegg, had been ordered to keep every patient locked down between 11 and midnight on the night of the murder. Clegg had nearly died in the fire, but was now conscious. When questioned, he admitted Mowbray had instructed him to pull the ward alarm after the 11th chapel strike. He had believed it was part of an experiment measuring how patients reacted to interrupted sleep. "Did Mowbray remain at the asylum?" Eleanor asked. "No," Clegg replied. "He left through the mortuary at 11:05. He returned before the false midnight and told me he had been in the dispensary the entire time." The journey through the tunnel took 10 minutes. Mowbray could have reached Blackmere by 11:15, attacked Harcourt at 11:17, drugged Eleanor, and returned before the staged midnight. Voss, meanwhile, remained at the King's Arms dinner to preserve his public alibi. Percival had found both men in the West Gallery later, because Voss arrived after the murder to direct the cover-up. Samuel's cufflink proved Voss's presence, but Mowbray had delivered the fatal blow. The account scheme, however, still required public proof. St. Orison's ledgers were gone, and the magistrate controlled the Blackmere volumes. Eleanor placed the tally key over the copied medicine schedules Clara had preserved. Its opening selected a series of patient numbers rather than payments. Each number corresponded to a woman confined after refusing to sell property near a proposed Voss railway line. Clara's sister was one of them. Adrian's mother was another. They did not begin with Blackmere, Eleanor said. For years, Mowbray declared inconvenient landowners insane. Voss acquired their estates through guardians, then rewarded the asylum with false donations. My mother owned the northern farms in her own right, Adrian said. They became part of Blackmere only after her death. She was their first attempt. Your father refused to sell after inheriting them, so Voss waited for a weaker moment. The coal discovery made the land worth killing for, while Adrian's financial crisis supplied the opportunity. Eleanor devised a plan that depended upon Voss's greatest weakness. He believed every person could be controlled by debt, shame, or reputation. She sent him a message, stating that she would surrender the tally key and sign a renewed commitment order if he delayed seizure of the villages. To make the offer credible, Adrian publicly returned to Blackmere alone and announced that the strain of the fire had worsened his wife's delusions. The words cost him more than Eleanor expected. Servants who had begun to believe her lowered their eyes, while investors praised the Duke for recovering his judgment. Voss accepted the bargain, but demanded that Eleanor submit before the magistrate, railway shareholders, village representatives, and 3 physicians at 9 o'clock. He wanted her humiliation to destroy every accusation permanently. Eleanor agreed. Before dawn, Reed escorted Clara, Clegg, Agnes, Percival, and Samuel by separate routes to the Blackmere village church. Samuel was weak but able to speak. Mrs. Wren remained with him and carried copies of the medicine schedules sewn inside her dress. Adrian ordered the original brass clock repaired by Abel Finch, Eleanor's elderly teacher, who arrived from York in response to a message Mrs. Wren had sent days before the escape. Finch confirmed that the stopped wheel had not been damaged by age. A sudden impact had bent it at precisely 11:17, while dried blood beneath the base remained lodged inside a screw channel too narrow to have been planted without dismantling the entire case. He also discovered that the hidden wire mechanism had been added using screws manufactured exclusively for St. Orison's maintenance department. At 8:45, Eleanor entered Blackmere's courtyard in the same gray dress she had worn while escaping the asylum. Hundreds of tenants gathered behind the railway officers who had come to mark the northern lands for seizure. Voss stood on the front steps beside the magistrate. Dr. Mowbray had returned during the night, claiming he had fled St. Orison's fire to seek medical assistance. His face displayed calm concern, but a fresh burn crossed the back of his right hand. Percival's shooter had passed through flames while escaping. On a table before them lay the railway agreement, Eleanor's commitment order, the seized estate ledgers, and the paper packet of poison found in her reticule. Voss addressed the crowd first. He described Eleanor as a tragic but dangerous woman who had manipulated servants, poisoned Samuel, set fire to the asylum, and coerced a wounded debtor into accusing innocent gentlemen. He announced that Adrian had accepted the necessity of permanent confinement. Angry voices rose among the tenants, but whether against Eleanor or the railway, she could not tell. Sign the order, Voss told Adrian. Adrian took the pen. Eleanor stood below him, apparently unprotected. Before my husband condemns me, she said, I ask Dr. Mowbray to repeat the testimony he gave after Mr. Harcourt's death. Mowbray smiled. Gladly. I was treating patients at St. Orison's when its chapel clock struck midnight. Mr. Harcourt was heard alive at Blackmere after the same 12 strokes. I could not have been present when he died. You are certain there were 12? Every person within a mile heard them. Including the final stroke 4 seconds after the others? Mowbray hesitated. Voss answered for him. A mechanical delay proves nothing. Eleanor looked toward the railway chairman. I did not mention a delay. Silence spread through the courtyard. Voss's cane stopped tapping. He had known the 12th stroke came late, although that detail appeared in no public report. Eleanor asked Abel Finch to place the repaired brass clock on the table and turn its hands toward midnight. The mechanism struck 11 times. Then it fell silent. Mowbray laughed too quickly. The clock was damaged. Everyone knows that. It was damaged at 11:17. Finch said. The blood inside its base proves it fell during Harcourt's attack. It could not have struck midnight afterward. Eleanor produced the charred chapel face and explained its missing 12th notch. Clegg stepped from the church doorway and confessed that Mowbray had ordered him to add the final alarm manually. Clara followed with the copied medicine schedules. Agnes identified the same drugs used to erase Eleanor's memory. Each witness weakened a separate portion of the alibi, yet Voss remained composed. Patients, attendants, debtors, and servants, he said. Everyone dependent upon the Duchess or promised protection by her husband. Where is evidence that no Ashcombe can purchase? Inside your own accounts. Eleanor laid the tally key over the first seized ledger, but the selected columns appeared blank. She tried the second. Again, nothing emerged. A cold certainty settled through her. The books had been exchanged after the magistrate seized them. Voss had anticipated the key. Your great proof reveals empty paper, he announced. Sign the order, Adrian. The Duke set down the pen. No. Railway officers moved toward the villagers. Voss raised the old loan agreement and declared Blackmere in default. The magistrate, faced with apparently useless evidence, ordered Eleanor detained pending examination for Samuel's poisoning. Constables surrounded her. For one terrible moment, it appeared that Voss had won. Then Eleanor looked at the substituted ledgers and noticed their leather bindings. Each spine carried the Blackmere crest, but the clock tower in the design showed both hands pointing upward. The authentic bindery stamp had always fixed the minute hand at 11:17 in memory of the estate's founding hour. These books had been manufactured recently by someone who had never seen the original seal clearly. Eleanor allowed the constables to take her wrists. You replaced the ledgers, she told Voss, and by doing so, you have finally given me the one thing I lacked. Another delusion? A lie you must now authenticate in public. She turned toward the magistrate. Ask Sir Julian where these books were bound. Voss glanced at Mowbray before answering. At Henley & Sons in London, the same firm Blackmere has used for 30 years. Eleanor smiled. Abel Finch opened his tool case and removed the tiny object released from the brass clock before the ballroom went dark, an object Reed had recovered beneath the marble table and kept hidden at Eleanor's instruction. It was not the tally key. It was Henley & Sons' original steel binding die, stolen from their workshop 6 months earlier. Engraved along its edge was the name of the man who had commissioned the false ledgers. Finch pressed the die into warm wax, but before he lifted it, Eleanor looked directly at Dr. Mowbray. If your name is not beneath this seal, you have nothing to fear. Mowbray reached for Voss's pistol. Mowbray's fingers closed around the pistol, but Adrian caught his wrist before he could draw it. The weapon fired into the stone steps, scattering the crowd. Reed struck Mowbray's arm with his baton, and the pistol fell beneath the table. 2 constables forced the physician to his knees while Abel Finch calmly lifted the steel die from the wax. The impression read, Edmund Mowbray, St. Orison's Medical Trust. No one spoke. Mowbray had ordered the false binding stamp 3 weeks before Harcourt's murder, proving that the replacement ledgers had been prepared before Eleanor ever discovered the account code. The magistrate compared the die with the counterfeit books and found the same flaw. The minute hand on Blackmere's clock tower pointed to 12 instead of 11:17. These ledgers came from the stamp commissioned by Dr. Mowbray, Eleanor said. Sir Julian knew where they were bound because he arranged their substitution after you seized the originals. Voss raised the loan agreement. A binding error does not invalidate Blackmere's debt. No, Eleanor replied. But fraud invalidates the seizure by which you intended to collect it. She asked Samuel Pike to step forward. Supported by Mrs. Wren, he crossed the courtyard and described how Harcourt had discovered payments moving from Blackmere through the railway company into St. Orison's. On the night of the murder, Samuel had been ordered to bring the solicitor's correspondence to the West Gallery. He arrived shortly after 11 and saw Mowbray emerge from the concealed passage. Voss seized him, threatened his daughters, and forced him behind the panel. At the false midnight, Samuel was ordered to say, I am occupied. Return in the morning. The servants outside the closed library door assumed the voice belonged to Harcourt. Mr. Harcourt was already dead, Samuel said. Dr. Mowbray struck him with the brass clock's base when he refused to surrender the tally key. The blood trapped inside the clock's screw channel authenticated that account. The bent balance wheel fixed the struggle at 11:17. Clegg's confession established that Mowbray left St. Orison's at 11:05, traveled through the mine tunnel, and returned before the false midnight. The chapel mechanism could produce only 11 strokes. Clegg had added the delayed 12th on Mowbray's orders. Therefore, Mowbray's alibi depended upon a midnight that never occurred. "And Lady Eleanor?" the magistrate asked. Samuel's face tightened with shame. She entered after hearing Harcourt scream. Mowbray pressed a drugged cloth over her mouth. Sir Julian arrived later and ordered us to place her beside the body. They believed her mother's history would make madness easier to prove than murder. Voss stepped away from the table. The word of a thief and an accomplice. "Then let us use your own word," Eleanor said. She reminded the crowd that Voss had identified the 4-second delay before anyone publicly revealed it. He had also claimed that the false ledgers came from Henley and Sons, although the books carried Mowbray's stolen die. His cufflink, found in Samuel's hand after 6 months of confinement, placed him inside the passage on the night of Harcourt's death. The altered railway contract revealed his intended method of seizing the northern land, while the loan agreement showed his second path to the same result if Adrian rejected the bait. Voss had designed both outcomes because he never expected anyone to examine them together. Percival then confessed to lending him the estate seal and produced letters in which Voss promised to cancel his gambling debt after Blackmere transferred the northern farms. The letters had been mentioned in Percival's financial confession and found by Reed in the saddlebag he abandoned at St. Orison's. Their wax matched Voss's private seal, and the handwriting was confirmed by his own solicitor. Faced with the complete chain, Voss turned upon Mowbray. "The doctor acted alone. I knew nothing of murder." Mowbray laughed bitterly from his knees. "You selected every landowner we can find. You ordered Harcourt silenced. You ordered the fire when the Duchess returned." Voss lunged toward him, but the constables intervened. The alliance built upon greed and fear collapsed the moment neither man could save himself by protecting the other. Eleanor then addressed the poison found in her reticule. The packet had been cut from one of the blank commitment forms discovered in Mowbray's medicine case. Its torn edge fitted the missing corner exactly. He had placed it in her bag when he seized her arm beside the hidden panel, then insisted upon searching that same bag after Samuel collapsed. Samuel had not been poisoned by the brandy. Mowbray had coated the rim of the glass before it was poured, ensuring the first drink would deliver the drug. The surgeon's analysis found the compound identical to the blue bottles recovered from Mowbray's case. The magistrate ordered Voss and Mowbray arrested for conspiracy, fraud, unlawful confinement, attempted murder, arson, and Harcourt's death. The railway seizure was suspended, and notices were sent to London preventing the company from transferring its assets. Percival surrendered voluntarily. His testimony and attempt to recover the evidence spared him the gravest charge, but not consequence. He lost his trusteeship, repaid what remained of his inheritance to Blackmere's tenants, and received a term of imprisonment for fraud and assisting the unlawful confinement. The 3 physicians who signed blank certificates were stripped of their licenses and prosecuted. Every surviving patient at St. Orison's received an independent examination. Clara Webb was appointed custodian of the records, while the institution's remaining funds were placed under a public charitable trust. Adrian recovered the authentic railway deposit after the court declared both agreements fraudulent. He refused to reopen negotiations with Voss's company and used the returned money to establish a road and market cooperative owned partly by the 7 northern villages. The coal seam remained beneath land that could not be sold without the consent of the families living above it. Yet Adrian understood that repairing the estate did not repair his marriage. Before the same tenants, servants, investors, and officials who had watched Eleanor accused, he stepped down from the front stairs and faced her without title or defense. "I signed away your freedom because believing powerful men was easier than believing the woman who trusted me," he said. "I called fear, concern, and cowardice mercy. I allowed you to be taken from your home, and when you begged me to listen, I used your terror as evidence against you. Nothing done today absolves me." He publicly revoked every order made during her confinement, restored her separate property, transferred legal control of her marriage settlement to trustees of her choosing, and surrendered his authority over her residence and medical care. He also funded an investigation into his mother's death, not to soften his guilt, but to restore the name of another woman Mowbray had silenced. "You owe me no forgiveness," Adrian finished. "If you leave Blackmere, the carriage, income, and house in York are yours. If you remain, no door here will ever be closed to you again." Eleanor looked at the great entrance through which she had once been dragged in her nightdress while the household watched. Now the doors stood open, and no hand held her. "I will not return to the marriage we had," she said. Adrian lowered his eyes. "I understand, but I may remain long enough to discover whether we can build a different one." Hope entered his face, restrained by the knowledge that hope was not permission. Eleanor chose rooms in the eastern wing, kept the keys Adrian had given her, and spent the following year transforming St. Orison's surviving buildings into a refuge where no woman could be confined without independent legal review. Adrian assisted only when invited. He testified publicly against Voss, sold his London residence to compensate the families whose land had been stolen, and never asked Eleanor to reward him for doing what justice required. Their affection returned slowly through ledgers reviewed side by side, village meetings where he deferred to her judgment, and quiet evenings in Mr. Finch's workshop repairing the brass clock. On the first anniversary of Harcourt's death, Eleanor installed it in Blackmere's library, with its hands still marking 1117. She did not conceal the damage. The bent wheel remained visible beneath a glass panel, a reminder that truth need not be flawless to endure. Adrian stood beside her, holding the winding key, but did not use it. "May I?" he asked. Eleanor considered him, then placed her hand over his, and turned the key with him. The mechanism began to move. When it reached midnight, it struck 11 times, and stopped. Adrian waited for a 12th sound that never came. Eleanor opened the hidden clasp and removed the last object Harcourt had preserved inside. A small strip of paper bearing the words, "Let the silenced woman set the hour." She reset the hands herself. Then she opened the library doors, and together they walked into a house where no one would ever again call obedience sanity or silence proof.